Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my lecture. So in our previous lectures we spoke about public goods and its features, and as we know that there are various factors which are responsible for market failure, and externality is one of them. So we'll talk today about externality and its different types and what are the reasons for which market fails due to externalities. To begin with, let us understand how do we understand externalities from the definitions and also from the features point of view. So now externalities can actually stem from both, like from consumptions and also from productions. So producing any goods and services, there might be some externalities. That a couple of examples that we had given. So for instance, pollution that we had taken as an example, or say traffic congestions, or sound pollutions, that we actually had given as an example of negative externalities. But then today we'll talk about how actually economics properties of these externalities and how they are actually addressed. So it can be negative and positive, and in case of negative, that we again I'm giving this example about pollutions, like one is driving, but if that car or vehicle doesn't have pollution clearance, then definitely there will be negative or adverse effects by the others, and therefore this can be regarded as negative externalities. And positive externalities that we actually consider, like for instance landscaping, or say gardening in my household, or in my in my house, that will have some sort of negative positive impact of my neighbors. So this can be regarded as, say, positive externalities. uh, so now market gets affected by these externalities, whether it is positive or negative. Market ends up in either in over consumptions or over productions, or under consumptions or under productions, and therefore we don't get socially sort of efficient resource allocations or optimal points when demand and supply, even demand and supply, they meet. So let us just have a sort of discussion what we mean here when we are saying that market gets affected by externalities, result in inefficient resource allocations. So like for instance, if we consider any commodity, and then here is the price of that particular commodities, and then quantity, and then we know that this is demand, which is downward sloping, and then supply, which is upward sloping, and then we are getting sort of equilibrium, like where demand and supply, they are intersecting at each other, say at point E, and then OP star is the optimum level of price of that particular commodity, and then Q star is optimum level of quantity. So at point E we can see that in the market it is actually getting equilibrium. So market efficiency is here, but then whether socially efficient or not, that is a question that we are trying to pose here. So maybe both the private buyers and sellers, both of them are at the equilibrium situations, but then maybe not society as a whole, and therefore the concept or the way we imagine demand and supply, that we kind of imagine differently when we talk about externalities, and especially when we think about externalities in context of environment. So we'll talk about that. So in this particular case, like if price is less than P star, then certainly this is a situation where excess demand is there, that means this particular range, that is excess demand is exceeding than supply, or if price is getting set at at a point where it is above than P star, then at this point supply is more than the demand, and therefore one is shortage, the other one is excess supply. So in both the cases, whether in case of supply, excess supply or shortage in supply, or whether in terms of excess demand or shortage of demand, so whether in that particular disequilibrium situations, whether society as a whole is kind of efficient, reaching at the efficient point or not, that is a point that we are going to talk about today. Let us discuss about the problem of externalities. So now, what is externalities? First, let us understand that. That is the actions of an individual or a firm that confer or uncompensated benefits on the others, and these are called positive externalities. So externalities is basically the actions. It could be positive or negative, but then in positive externalities, it is like the actions of the individual or the firm that benefits on the others, and this particular concept is basically we can call, or one can call, as positive externalities. In case of negative externalities, is basically actions that adversely affect the others, like if I as a producers produce any commodities, whether it is clothes or say steel, but then as a result, like in the process of the production, if I'm polluting river or if I'm polluting air, then definitely other people, like whether my neighborhoods or the villagers, if they are negatively impacted or adversely impacted, that particular externalities will be referred as negative externalities. So these are negative and positive, but then positive can also arise from productions and consumptions, and negative externalities can also arise from production and consumptions. So in this particular context, like in explaining externalities, whether it is positive or negative, whether in context of consumptions or productions, we will first begin our discussion by introducing three concepts. One is social marginal benefits, what we call SMB, then private marginal cost, and then social marginal cost. So we'll begin with this and then see that how it goes. And this is primarily, it is important because the way in which we imagine demand and supply in context of externalities, that needs to be imagine. So what is marginal benefits? So marginal benefits is like the individual's marginal benefits stem from the production of an extra unit of the commodity. So it's basically what are the benefits that one is drawing from one unit of additional production of that particular commodity. This commodity could be steel produced, or say any commodity that is like say steel in case of steel productions, or say any cloth in case of textiles. So if I want to understand that, so marginal benefit will give like what is the changes in the total benefits or in the benefits that is actually coming out from producing one additional unit of that particular commodity. So it's basically marginal benefits, and marginal benefits is reflected by the demand curve. So that means the feature of marginal benefit will have the similar kind of characteristics, economic characteristics, that the demand curve has. Like demand curves that we know when we talk about any demand functions of any commodity is basically the inverse relationship between price of that commodity and quantity demanded for that commodity. So when we talk about marginal benefits, is basically features the law of demand, that particular property will be reflected. So marginal benefits, but if we want to draw in graphs, then is basically the inverse relationship between price of that commodity and quantity produced of that particular commodity. So this is basically marginal benefits. So now let's move to private marginal cost. So when we are talking about firms private marginal cost are the associated one with producing an extra unit of commodity. So when consumer or demanders like for that particular commodity, when we try to understand our marginal benefit, that we get it from our demand functions, like, or from demand features. In case of marginal private marginal cost is basically producer's point of view, like when producer wants to produce one additional unit of a commodity, and that commodity could be anything. So in that context, any marginal costs that are associated with producing that particular extra unit of that particular commodity will be considered as private marginal cost, and it is reflected by the market supply curve. So now let's come to another one point, and this is the the point that we are talking about. Like, this is what we are introducing more. Like, imagine private benefit. Let us talk about first private benefit. So let us imagine here, like in the graphical illustration, like say on the vertical axis is the price, and then horizontal axis is quantity produced or quantity demanded. So marginal benefits that we already said is basically is a downward sloping. So this is nothing, is basically our demand curve, which is private marginal benefit, right? And when we are talking about private marginal cost, it is basically upward sloping, which is the supply of the commodity, is basically private marginal cost, right? So when we are trying to understand private marginal cost, is basically nothing, is basically the upward portion of the marginal cost curve for the firm, and which is nothing, is called as the supply curve of the firm. And therefore supply curve of the firm will be presenting private marginal cost curve, which is upward sloping, which shows the positive relationship between price and quantity supply. And then they are intersecting at point, say at point A. So A is the market equilibrium. Is one can also say that at A market is restored and under perfect competitions, and then quantity that market get it, like optimum level of quantity, and then here is optimum level of price, like P star. So supply curve is nothing, is basically private marginal cost, and demand here in this particular case is nothing, is private marginal benefits. So now the third point that we are highlighting here, that social marginal cost. So social marginal cost is referred as the private marginal cost to the producers, like cost of production for the producers minus any cost associated with the production of a goods that are imposed on others. Like for instance, producers is producing, whether it is say textile owner, or say producer of steel. So then they are not in the cost of production, they are not actually including the cost that they are supposed to include, because that is actually impacting on the health or others, like in terms of noise or in terms of air pollutions. So it is basically others are bearing the that particular cost, which is an outcome of this particular activities of the farms. If that is not getting adjusted in the cost of production, so that particular cost will be will be referred as social marginal cost. So in this particular case, social marginal cost will be will be referred as this, like SMC, which is you know um, the curve is leftward shift of supply curve, but then this supply curve is supply curve for the society, where we are also taking into account about the about the marginal damages that are incurring due to this particular production of the goods. So we have in case of supply curve, we have two components. One is private marginal cost, like in the private market where buyers and suppliers, they are in fact getting equilibrium and getting optimally efficient at point A. So Q from the market's point of view, market is perfectly reaching at the efficient point at A, where OQ star amount of quantity is produced, and OP star is of the price of that particular commodity is set. But then certainly that is some of the cost that are incurred due to these externalities out of the production. And then now society has a different supply curve which considers not only private cost, that also considers the additional cost that are associated with this particular production, but borne by the others who are not part of the this particular productions. So even for steel or say cloth, even the consumers or the citizens who are not buying this particular commodity, they are bearing the cost if that is not included in the cost of production. So that is what we have to be very careful in this particular case of externalities, like what is supply for the private producers, and what is the supply curve for the society's point of view. So we can clearly see at point A, where private producers and consumers are in they are getting at equilibrium point. But then another one point that we got point B, where demand, like private marginal benefit is getting intersecting with social marginal cost, which is the supply curve of that particular commodity, considering entire society at large, and therefore at B they are getting another one equilibrium point, and that point B. So in this particular case, like at point B, we have different level of quantity, which is OQ1, and different level of price OP1, and then we'll discuss later what does that mean in this particular externalities debate. So let's move on with the negative externalities. So let's first begin with the negative externalities, and our objective is to understand the economics of negative externalities. So we'll begin first economics of negative production externalities, and then we'll move to economics of negative consumption externalities. And once we do this, and then we'll move towards economics of positive production externalities. So what is negative production externalities? So when a farm's production reduces the well-being of others, and that is who are not actually compensated by the farm or by the producers, and that is precisely what we are trying to say is like is a negative externalities. And in this particular context, like let us also kind of discuss like what is private marginal benefit, the direct benefit to consumers of consuming an additional unit of a good by the consumer. So it is basically again marginal benefit. So here marginal benefit that we are referring is like private marginal benefits. We already discussed in our last slide, is like benefit that I am drawing by consuming an additional unit of that particular commodity. So now social marginal benefit is like private marginal benefit, like PMB to consumer minus any cost associated with the consumption of good that are imposed on others. So when we try to understand net benefits from that from private marginal cost is private marginal benefits is basically when we try to understand benefits from the society's point of view. It is not only the benefit that we will talk about from private benefits point of view. So it is basically encompasses like private marginal benefit, but then minus we have to deduct all the cost that are incurred in the process of the production of that that particular commodity is that cost, and then we have to deduct that particular cost from the benefit, and then we'll get the social marginal benefit. So it is like net benefit at the societal level. So then we have another one, point is like marginal damage. So it's basically the damage that occurs due to an extra amount of production. Like as we discussed, like when a producer decides to produce more, say 100 units, from 100 units to 101 units of that particular commodity, then this is producers duty to understand what are the damage that will be occurring by producing that particular additional unit of that particular production. So that particular damage is referred here as marginal damage. So let us discuss this with the help of graphical representations. Already we introduced that. So let us assume that we are talking about the market that we can imagine. Maybe we can think like this is clothes market, or you can also imagine market for steel. Here price of that particular commodity, and here say X is that commodity. X could be anything that produces and that has the marginal benefit and also the cost. And on the horizontal axis is the quantity produced for this particular commodity. And as we know that it is demand is a downward sloping, and demand is representing private marginal benefit. And in this particular case, in case of economics of say negative production externalities, consumer will not have any sort of impact on this. So therefore social marginal benefit and private marginal benefit, they are equals to each other. And then say it is supply curve, which is upward sloping, which actually nothing is basically shows all the points or the functional relationship between price and quantity of the producers that producer produces and considers the cost of production. And here therefore this one is private marginal cost. So now in this particular case, like in case of negative production externalities, assume that clothes while producing clothes, there will be production sludges or residue that is routed to the into the river, and river is getting polluted, and then as a result fisher communities they are getting affected. So in the particular, definitely it has the social cost, and social costs are borne by the say fishers communities or any others, those who are using the river. So this cost we can measure through marginal damage for the per unit of producing clothes, or could be any other product, like even it could be also true in case of say steel. So then social marginal cost will be shifting leftward, because this one is social marginal cost, which is nothing, is like it will include private marginal cost plus marginal damage. And then this difference, the shift, the parallel shift, the amount that got shifted from PMC to SMC, is this is nothing, this particular amount is per unit damages, which is we are referring here as marginal damages. So in this particular context, in the negative production externalities, we got two equilibrium point. One is A here, and another one is B. So let us assume that at point A, like what we got it. So at point A, where private market in the private markets, it is getting efficient outcome because there is no surplus. So at point A, private producers through supply curve, like through PMC, is getting determined by or intersecting at A with demand curve, which is PMB, like private marginal benefits, which is also equals to social marginal benefit. And here we get say at P1 and Q1. So OP1 and OQ1 are the price and quantity at the private market, and it is absolutely efficient. right? So in this particular context, social marginal cost, like supply curve for the for the society, it is like it's a different, and therefore we got the new sort of supply curve, and here at point B we get new equilibrium point. So production is basically Q2, production is getting reduced from OQ1 to OQ2. So and then price is increasing from P1 to P2. So but at A, if it is at A at the private level, but then since marginal damage is there, and therefore producer cannot produce at point A, producer has to produce at point B, right? And if producer is producing B, so from the economy, Q2 Q1 amount means Q1 minus Q2 amount is actually getting out from the economy, which is not being produced, but at the same time price of per unit production is increased by P1 P2, right? So what is the deadweight loss for in this particular case? What is the society's loss? Of course, market is not, private market is not at the equilibrium level, and therefore we see at point A we could have reached that level, which is actually moving out from the society, like this is like from the economy, what we can refer as dead weight loss in this out of as an outcome of the negative production externalities. So in this case, we can see like deadweight loss for this negative production externalities. A is the equilibrium, which is that happens in the perfect competitions, and then P1 OP1 we can consider as price under perfect competitions, and OQ1 we can call it as quantity determined under perfect competitions. But then due to these externalities, due to this marginal damages, so we are getting new. So B is socially optimal point, and A is of course market efficiency point, right? But then Q1 and Q2, so if we don't consider socially optimal point, so and private producers are producing at A, then certainly we are doing the overproductions, right? So this is overproduction phenomena in this particular case, like what is nothing is basically the amount of like Q1 Q2 Q1 amount, or Q1 minus Q2, like Q1 production under perfect competitions is higher than production under like socially optimal, like Q2. So Q2 is certainly socially optimum level of quantity. So when quantity under private market efficiency is higher than this, producers end up producing more than the required one in the society, and therefore producer is producing end up producing overproduction. So in this particular case, and then when we produce at a societal socially optimum level of quantity like OQ1, and therefore certainly say area of ABC is actually is a loss in the society, and this is referred as is nothing is basically dead weight loss. So and this dead weight loss is coming because we are actually producing at B, which in this particular situation market efficiency is not taking place. So I stop here, and these are the references that I have used for this externality class. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you in my next class.